Today's guest on the Winning Teams podcast is Charlie Gilkey. Now, Charlie has got an interesting background, which he shares in a bit more detail in the interview. But he's got a military background, which really, I think, sets him up very well to actually talk about team habits and the habits that really will stand a team well. Very, very important topic, and certainly is very close to my heart because it's something that I talk about with the teams that I work with and the leaders that I coach. Because I think that, the team habits and the habits that a team have, are a determinant of the quality of the work and the output that they actually deliver to their stakeholders. And so I think it's a hugely important point. And what Charlie does really well is kind of to talk about the things that we know are broken and what we should do about those right now, and stop actually just accepting the fact that they are broken and that they're going to stay broken. But also how you can actually develop them within the team, and how you can do that irrespective of the size of your organization. Your team can be a standout. You don't have to wait for the organization to change. You can change where you're standing. So I think it's a really important message for people in, it doesn't matter what size team, what level team they're in, everybody has the power and the authority to actually do this. So I really do encourage people to listen to this. I think Charlie has written a great book. I think it's a real how-to. I said it's a process book. It's really, really important that people grab onto it and grab onto the ideas and really, really make sure that you have got the habits within your team that are going to serve you well and help you to achieve the potential that the team has within it, because so much potential gets lost along the way. So sit back and listen to the very interesting, very clear Charlie Gilkey. Charlie, thank you so much indeed for being a guest here on Winning Teams. Are we looking forward to this conversation?
I am absolutely looking forward to this conversation. Thanks for having me, John.
It's a real pleasure. You're the author of Team Habits: How Small Actions Lead to Extraordinary Results. And I want to focus in on that because I know you've written other books on that, but I do want to focus in on this particular book because I think it's got a very particular relevance and resonance with my audience. But maybe just before we dig into the book, maybe helpful if you give some of your background, because I think your background is relevant to the topic.
Yeah, thanks for that. So in the mid-2000s, I was simultaneously an Army Joint Forces military logistics coordinator, which is a mouthful, but I made sure the Army, Air Force, and Navy were all on the same sheet of music with their logistics operations. And I was also simultaneously working towards completing my PhD in philosophy. So I'm a social philosopher and ethicist by training on that side. And around that time, I had the very human problem of, too many ideas, too little time. And so I started doing some research of like, what are other people doing here? Like any good scholar and officer would, and really realized that what was missing was really resources that help in this messy middle of projects, right? So a lot of the literature talked about big principles, big ideas, and then they talked about really tactical, concrete steps. But most of our challenges lie in completing projects, and specifically quarter-sized and greater projects. And there just wasn't a lot there. So I started doing that work, started sharing it at the website Productive Flourishing, and that's grown into a lot of different things. And, but at the core, it's always been really three things. How do we do our best work individually? Two, how do we do it as teams? And then three is, how do leaders set their teams up so that they can do their best work? So that's been the core of my work for the last 15, 16 years. And Team Habits, to your point, is just that second question, like, how do we work better as teams, that I finally produced a book for.
I think that's fascinating because, I mean, I've been working since I set up my own business 20 years ago. I've been working I've been coaching teams and I've been coaching individuals. And the three things that you said there are absolutely, at the core. It's the best of the individual, it's the best of the team, and how do you lead? So I think it is absolutely irrelevant. Interestingly, when you in the book, The Team Habits, you kick off the book talking about broken printers. Just curious to maybe to elaborate on that, why that was your starting place.
Well, it's my starting place, John, because every business that I've ever worked at or consulted with has at least one broken printer that everybody knows about. And it's been there for a long time. Sometimes they jokingly get names and employee numbers, right? They just been there that long. And it's a really fascinating thing when you think about it, John, because it's not the broken printer itself that's the problem. It's the downstream effects of the broken printer. So because the broken printer has that stupid streak that goes down the middle, like you're printing it off, you're ready, and then you're like, oh crap, this is a meeting with the big boss, and it's got that stupid streak down there, and then you're scrambling and you rush, and then you run into that meeting scrambled and harried and look like a fool, not because you don't know what you're doing, but because of the stupid broken printer. And it's just an analogy for the small breaks at work that we allow to remain and how it makes our life worse. And there's been so many studies that show that minor setbacks and frustrations like that actually have an outsized impact on our morale and engagement. But here's the interesting thing, John. It's at most a $500 decision or a $500 purchase in a 30-minute sort of research thing. Like we could fix it, but we don't. And yet, we can call a meeting in a heartbeat. We can waste more time and treasure doing something that may or may not actually make our work better. And we do that every day. And yet, employee number 47, i.e., the printer, remains as it is. And I use that as an analogy for a lot of the different ways. So it can be that real broken printer, or it could be the CC thread from hell. We all know what we're talking about. If you work in an organization, there's 20 of these that fly around, and we spend hours of our day just reading CC threads to make sure that we needed to read it or didn't need to read it. That's a broken printer too. And the thing about it is, John, whether it's a CC thread from hell, whether it's the broken printer, we as teammates participate in it. We're not victims, mere victims to what's going on. We actually actively participate in it. And so when I wrote Team Habits, I wanted to actually us to have a reckoning about that. Is like, let's not worry about what the C-suite's doing. Let's not worry about what's happening external in the world. Let's just look at how we 4 to 8 people that spend 80% of our time working with each other treat each other day in and day out, and allow to continue day in and day out.
Yeah, it's interesting to say that, because one of the other things that I come across, and it kind of falls into your broken printer metaphor as well, is that every organization, or pretty much every organization that I would go into, and I'm sure every organization you go into be no different, is people say, we've far too many meetings, right? And then you say, well, why don't you stop going to meetings? Oh, well, I can't do that, right? And you can say, well, are you a victim of this, or are you perpetrating it? And to a very large extent, and and I'm not talking at a junior level, I'm talking at a senior level, who don't seem to have the power, if that's the word, or the energy, or the drive, or the will, or whatever it is about meetings, because you can vote with your feet when it comes to meetings. And I'm interested because when you're talking about there, these are things that these are kind of habits that we get into. We all know the printer's broken, but nobody actually does anything about it. When we get into talking with teams, and as I was saying to you, I work a lot with teams, and we start defining what are the team's ways of working. Are team habits different to ways of working?
So I do separate workways, which is what you're talking about, from team habits. And so when you look at workways, you need to think of the constellation of things like org structure, um, regulatory policies, things like that are ways we work together that most of us can't change, right? Team habits are a subset of those workways, and these are things that are incredibly malleable. And, while I typically don't need to define team habits, I'm going to go to, right? We know personal habits. We know a lot about that from the body of work there. So take those same concepts and just say, this is what we do collectively. We have these collective habits that we participate in. And so they're not all of the ways that we work with each other, but for our purposes here, they're the ones that we can all change, right? An individual contributor on a team can't go and change the org structure,
Right.
but she can decide to bring up the topic with her teammates about how many either broken printers or bad meetings they have. And we can do that with each other. And I think for the rest of our conversation, John, for for the conversation, I'm just going to assume that we're on a team. So it's me and it's John and a
Yeah.
few other people, but I keep it between me and John. If John and I show up for a meeting, we together can look at each other and say, that wasn't it. Like that, let's not do that again. And we together can decide to do something different. So, John, I mean, the thing here is there are 3 dimensions of power at work. And most of the time, we only talk about 2 of them. So there's the first dimension we talk about is personal power, which is power 2. That's what Charlie and John individually can do with their own expertise, perspectives, knowledge, and know-how, right? On the other end of the spectrum, we have institutional power, and that's power over. That's what Charlie and John can do by virtue of their position. So we have power over people or maybe or budgets or projects or whatever. Most of the conversation at work is fraught because it only talks about those 2. You or Charlie individually has to fix something and do all the work, or Charlie, the manager or leader, has to fix something because that's their position. But it completely overlooks the magic of working in teams, which is interpersonal power. That's power with. That's what John and Charlie can do together that neither one can do individually, but we also don't need to invoke institutional power to get it done. So we can lean in at our small team of 4 to 8 people. We can lean into that interpersonal power and say, look, we don't need the C-suite to tell us how to run our meetings. We can do that ourselves. We don't need necessarily to all watch the CC thread from hell. We can rotate and we can stop doing that to each other. And when we really lean into that, John, I think it opens up a lot of space for us to solve some of these work problems together, reclaim some agency, and really start to push innovation and great work with each other.
Okay, but what you get, just to pushing back on that, what people will say to you, and I'm sure you've heard this many times, is, well, hang on a second, I'm just a small cog in this very large organization. We've 10,000 people here. This is the way things get done around here. So I really can't change that.
Yeah, I think that's a cop-out, 100%. Because again, I'm saying in your team of 4 to 8 people that you work 80% of your time with, and that's the reality of work. Yes, you might be in a 10,000 person organization, but that 10,000 person organization is a team of teams. In your team, you can actually change that, right? You can and that's why I want to say Charlie and John can change that with each other. You can't say like, this is just how things get done. If your team, and it's one of those broken printers, so many people know of the dysfunctions of an organization. If you went into a room, and I do this because I'm a facilitator, and I just ask the people, what's not working? They will tell you if there's not.
And they know. They know,
and they will tell you if there's not a fear of reprisal for saying it, right?
Yes.
And so it's not that people don't know what the dysfunctions are. It's that they've either opted out of the agency to fix it in their team, or they have tried to do that and the organization has shut them down. Like, why are you changing this? It works just fine. It doesn't work just fine. Yes. Right. And so at a certain point, I get it, because in some work environments, they're particularly bad and toxic, you get used to just gaslighting yourself. Like, know it's not working, but enough people around you tell you that it's not a problem that you're just like, okay, whatever. It's the broken printer. That's why we have employee number 47. Right.
Yeah.
But they know it's broken.
Can I dig down into the habits? Because in the book, you talk about the 8 categories of team habits. And I just think it's worthwhile. I know I'm coming down into very much a detail, but I do want to, because I think it's actually helpful to say at the higher level, but also to come down into. So maybe explain the 8 categories of the team habits.
Yeah, and what I'll say, John, is I actually love coming down into details. That's my Army background. That's where the work happens. And I think too many leaders look over the details to their organization's perils. Right. And so
your background is in logistics, isn't it?
It is.
All about the detail.
It really is all about the details, but most military campaigns, all about the details. Right.
Absolutely.
Whether it's logistics, infantry, it doesn't matter. So the 8 categories of team habits are, I'm just going to read them out in order because I'll mix them up and then confuse the reader. So it's belonging, decision-making, goal setting and prioritization, planning, communication, collaboration, meetings, and core team habits, which are poorly named, but is the best we can come up with. The core team habits are the personal effectiveness habits that we decide as a team we're going to do together. So if John and I both realize we're Monday morning planners, let's make a team habit around that so that we don't schedule a 10 o'clock meeting Monday morning that thwarts our planning. And then we show up to a meeting unprepared because we weren't able to do the planning that we do.
Hmm.
And so when you look at those 8 types of team habits, they're actually a diagnostic tool, because it turns out that high belonging, high performing teams, first off, have high belonging, which is why I start with that. But they set good goals together, right? They make good decisions together. They have good collaboration team habits. They have great meetings, right? Things like that. So you can just look at those 8 things and say, where is my team on there, and which category is the most broken? And I need to say this, John. I am not an anti-meeting guy. I know there are a lot of folks out there, right, that are just anti-meetings, so on and so forth. I'm an anti-bad meeting guy,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah.
Right. I love a well-structured meeting that does the work. But the reason meetings are such the whipping boy is because meetings are the one container in which all the team's habits invoke at once. Right. So if you have bad communication team habits, they show up during a meeting. If you have bad collaboration habits, they show up during a meeting. If you have bad belonging habits, they show up during the meeting. And so you have this 30 minutes or an hour where there gets to be a parade of broken printers and a parade of things that's not working, which is why so many people don't like them.
Well,
However,
I also think though, I think, just sorry to interrupt you there, Charlie, but just the other thing I think is that what really gets up my nose is, at meetings where people have got their laptop or their iPad open, and they're multitasking. They're answering emails, they're doing other things, they're looking at what's coming up on Teams, all that sort of stuff, which creates very ineffective meetings, and yet it's acceptable.
well, yeah, it's acceptable. And I actually write about this in the book. So employee number 47, i.e. the broken printer, can sometimes be the reason that people are on their computers and phones, because they can't print from the damn printer.
Hmm.
Right. And so that's structural elements. But again, in our team, me, John, and a few other people, we can look at each other and say, hey, this isn't working for any of us. Like having multitasking for our meeting, let's not do that together. Right. We can create some team habits. Like if I were sort of president of work for the world for the day, I'd have like three rules, but one of them would be no agenda, no meeting, period. Right. If someone puts a meeting on your calendar, there's not an attached agenda, you don't know what it's about, automatic decline. Right. And we can do that as a team. Again, might not be able to like decline the CEO's meeting. Can't change that per se. But how many times really does a CEO put a meeting on your calendar? Really?
Yeah.
Right. Most of those meetings come from John and Charlie just plopping a meeting on the calendar. So we can just decide as a team, and again, make it a team habit. No agenda, no meeting. And what happens, because I've done this work for decades now, what happens is meetings start to decline because people actually think about what they need that meeting to do and find another way to get it done besides just, I don't know, let's get together and figure it out. No, let's stop doing that to each other. Like,
Yeah.
let's
Yeah.
stop doing the thing where we spend 15 to 20 minutes figuring out why we're together and what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Wait, you've been doing this, Charlie, for a number of years, and I'm just curious in terms of, you talk about when the whole pandemic hit. I mean, I know pre-sale has not gone away completely by any means, but that suddenly everyone went from everybody in the office to everybody at home, right? What happened to habits, team habits? Did they become more important to embrace? Did they actually get lost somewhere in the whole transition? And what about it now, when we've got a combination, we've got a hybrid of different variations of it, but it's hybrid of one shape or another?
Yeah. So the unwanted gift of COVID is that it took all of our workways and all of our team habits and just dumped them in the trash bin. Right.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, like, we had to figure out basic things like, how do we meet? Where do we meet? Who facilitates a meeting? How many people can meet? Just very basic questions like that. Where do we send task lists because we don't have the whiteboard anymore? Like, how do we talk about what we're doing today? So it just took all of those and dumped them out. And I'm of the, firm mindset, and this is a quote from Rahm Emanuel, of, never let a good crisis go to waste. And so when I was working with teams and people from my audience, I was like, okay, here's the thing. We are going to have to recreate a new normal because the old way of working is gone and it's not coming back. It really is not going to come back. So all of the people that are like, come back to the office, like, let's just go back to normal. Normal does not exist anymore. That
No.
old normal. So I said, since we already have to create a new normal, let's create a better new normal. It's a perfect time for us to really say, okay, since we're learning how to work together again differently, let's be intentional about that. Like, let's redesign it at the team level so that it works for us. And so you're right. We're in year 3 of the pandemic cycle. There's pandemic cycles tend to be 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
So I rained on people's parades during the first year of the pandemic because I'm like, here's the thing, 2 truths. One, this is going to take a lot longer than you think it's going to take. And 2, we're going to be fine. All things considered, we're going to get through this. So we're like a little over halfway through. Um, Still at that point to where we're sort of in the synthetic stage where we're trying to take what worked from the before times and trying to merge it with the tools and technologies and team
Yeah.
habits that we have now. So team habits are very much in flux, but I'm going to say the same thing. Every day we show up to work. Every day we participate in team habits. Some are bad, some are good. Every day we have a chance to say, you know what, that last thing we didn't work so well. Let's do it better. And that's very much, I learned that in the Army, right? It's a very much one of those things where every operation you get better, you get tighter, you review it. What can we like, just that Kaizen approach. And I just want that to be a team level discipline versus a top down org change, because top down org changes have a failure rate of 66 to 75% that most of the time don't work. But team level changes, when fostered, when cultivated, when stuck with, actually have an incredibly high success rate.
And do you believe that in this world of the hybrid working, which is just where we are, do you believe that team instituting team habits is more important now than previously, or is it just the same?
I think honestly, working in the office with each other made us lazy because
Yeah,
we can grab people, we can have crutch meetings. We just had all of those different ways that we didn't have to stop and say, wait a second, I need to think about doing this and communicating this in a way that works across 6 time zones. Right. I need to think about some of these types of things. So I think it's more important now. The analogy that I'll sometimes give, John, and I'll use American football as opposed to British football, right? Is it's, like working hybrid and working virtual is like playing football with people, but you can't see them on the field. Right. And so like if you kick a ball someone's direction, or you throw the ball someone's direction, they've got to tell you, I've got it, and this is how far I took it. Right. And here's what needs to happen next. And so we're needing to recreate those in a hybrid environment so
yeah,
that, and I'll talk about this in the book, just a simple move, a shoot, move, communicate. That's a core team habit of just saying, I got it. I'm doing the thing. I moved this far. Here's where I am. It's incredibly helpful when people can't see where you are and maybe they're not in your work management software and didn't see that you updated it or whatever. Right. Just using some of those basic principles is more important now, and the other reason it's more important is because we have a few years of students, recent college grads, entering the workforce that did not learn work management skills in the way that previous generations or previous college graduates did. So
yeah.
they're entering the workforce with a lot of maybe knowledge, but not a lot of know-how. They literally do not know how to work in the workforce because no one taught them. And so being able to take those RCGs in and saying, okay, here's how we do things. Here are our team habits. Here's how this works. Here's how we use Zoom. Here's how we use Slack or Teams. It's incredibly helpful for everyone. And what it does, John, is it lowers the cognitive and emotional overheads of work. Like imagine if we got to show up and we didn't have to worry that we had each other's back because we have high belonging. We didn't have to figure out how to do every dang thing because we had really clear team habits that we'd agreed to. And if we fumble the ball, we know our teammates will tell us because we built the environment such that we do that with and for each other. How much better would work be if we can just show up and do that versus wondering what type of relationship we're in and status of our relationship, wondering how we're going to get the thing done, wondering if the work I did was okay. That's hard.
Yeah. In when with the team, when they constitute their own habits and establish their own habits, but we live in a dynamic world, and things change. When should we change our habits, or how do we know that, what we actually need as a team, we need to change our habits, because nothing stands still.
Yeah. Well, and so a secret here, John, is Team Habits is actually a systems book, right? Because your team habits or create a system of activities that your team does. And in any true system, when you change one thing, it has sometimes unknown effects of other
Right.
things down the stream. And so you may fix exactly the perfect thing, and then it breaks something else three clicks away that you then have to go fix. And so it's always a dynamic process. But to answer your question, two really easy points. One is find the thing that's painful right now. Find that broken printer that you kick over every day that you get frustrated by, that's causing, the complaint and commiseration, and fix that. The second one is, especially once you've gotten in a habit of fixing the things that are painful, really fix the things that are keeping you from solving your biggest challenges or pursuing your biggest opportunities. If you just use high pain points and high gain points as a sort of compass to figure out what team habits to change, it's pretty easy. Like, is it frustrating you and pissing you off? Change it. If it's
Yeah.
keeping you from being the best team and you know it, change it. And then guess what? To your point, 2 to 4 months later, you're going to have to change it anyways. Right. And so I think when we let go of sort of the victim mindset that work is just what it is and we just have to deal with it, and really look to see that it's always going to be changing. It's, are you going to be intentional and proactive and compassionate about the changes and stand up and be the teammate you want your teammates to be? Or are you going to wait for the latest, exogenous event to happen that then all of a sudden you got to do a fire drill and change something?
Okay.
I hope we do more of the former.
So somebody listening today to you talking about this, Charlie, and they're saying, okay, fine, I get it, I'm interested, I want to do so. Today, give them something to do today that actually can kickstart them in looking and changing their team habits.
Okay, so it's kind of cheeky, but we do have a team habits quiz that they could take. But just listening from this conversation, thinking about those 8 categories of team habits, and I'm going to say them again because I'm going to take the question that you got, right? So here they are: belonging, decision making, goal setting and prioritization, planning, communication, collaboration, meetings, and personal effectiveness habits that you do as a team. Which one of those categories is the most broken in your team? Start there. And don't try to fix it all by yourself. It will not work. Go to your teammates. This would be Charlie going to John and saying, hey, the way we communicate's not really great. Do you agree? Yeah. And John's like, yeah, we agree. Okay. So what could we do together to fix that? What's broken for you? What's broken for me? And use that interpersonal power to start fixing it, and not just assuming that it's a giving that it's got to suck.
Right. Great. I love that. Charlie, thank you so much for being with us. 2 things I ask everybody on the podcast. The first is a book other than your own. And I know you've written more than one book, but a book other than your own that's had a significant impact. And I'm kind of glancing at your bookshelves behind you, and I recognize a lot of them, I have to say. But what one would you say, if I had to ask you, which one you feel really has influenced you very significantly?
I'm actually going to go with a recent one, and this is Humankind by Rutger Bregman, is a Danish writer. And the reason I'm recommending that one is it shows the social studies and the evidence that actually most humans are decent. And when you start from that perspective, most humans are decent. Most people are doing the best they can. Most people want to do a good job. I think it radically changes how you think about teamwork and leadership, versus if you think that people are lazy and like just out to get things and so on and so forth. So Humankind is the book that I would recommend.
Oh, that's great. I love that. That's a new one. I haven't read that, so that goes on the list. Second question, and anybody who's written a book called Team Habits will definitely have an answer for this. Daily rituals, what are they? How do they serve you? And how did you develop them?
So for me,
And sustain them. Sorry, and
and
sustain
sustain
them.
them. So for me, I have a contemplative practice in the morning. It's not quite meditation, but it's not quite prayer, somewhat in the middle, right? That I take, between 30 to 45 minutes and just do that practice. And then it's followed by a walk to the coffee shop. It's not so much about the coffee, it's about the walk, right? And if I do those two things, days are great. If I fail to forget one of those, or if I fail to do one of those, it's going to be an awkward day. And so that's my morning routine, and it just sets me up for the rest of the day.
Fantastic. Charlie, how can people get in touch with you? I know we'll put it all in the show notes, but just if they're listening now, how can they reach out to you and find more of the great information that you have on your website and also to buy the book?
Well, thanks so much for that. If you're interested in team habits, just go to betterteamhabits.com. You'll learn more about the book and some other resources we have to support that. If you're on LinkedIn, I'm also Charlie Gilkey on LinkedIn.
Charlie, thank you so much indeed for being a guest. It's been a real honor to have you. I love the topic. I think it's so much makes sense for people and teams, people working with teams. And I think what you've given them is a kind of a how they can actually do something about it today. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, John.